Hello everybody, my name is Ollie, welcome back to the channel. I'm a doctor living and working in England as part of the NHS. Today we're going to be talking about how to approach, in the context of a med school interview, a time when you made a mistake. And admitting our mistakes isn't easy, even under completely ordinary circumstances. And it's something that lots of us, myself included, try to avoid. Because we avoid difficult and painful things. It's a very normal defense mechanism. However, in medicine, we do have an ethical and professional duty to not only own up to our mistakes, but to reflect very hard on them. Before we jump into talking about how you should do this, I think it's really important to understand the why, as that will give you the deep understanding that will make having these conversations a little bit easier and a bit more organic. The first really important thing to understand is that mistakes are an opportunity for learning. As doctors, we are practicing a craft, the art of medicine, and just like any other craft, that's something that you have to get better and better and better at over time, through repetition and through making mistakes and learning how not to repeat that mistake and getting better. And actually, in some circumstances, it's only possible to get better through making a mistake, receiving feedback from somebody more experienced and knowledgeable than you, and then acting upon it. Without that feedback and without that mistake, learning wouldn't actually occur. Now, secondly, and then revisiting this idea of why doctors actually have a professional duty to own up to and admit to their mistakes. As we all know, it's a fairly fundamental concept that there is a huge power differential between doctors and their patients. Because despite all of the work that has been done and is ongoing to help try and balance and flatten this power dynamic a little bit, there will basically always be one. And that comes back to the nature of the doctor-patient relationship, that doctors are experts being consulted for their advice. They are seen as more knowledgeable and more equipped, which they are, that's the whole point of the profession, than the typical patient, and to use their knowledge and experience to solve a problem. And because of that dynamic, there is obviously huge amounts of potential harm that can happen. Doctors in general, for very many very complicated reasons, including knowledge differentials, the whole culture that surrounds being a doctor, remembering that's very ingrained into society as well, will be taken very seriously simply because they are doctors. That holds a lot of weight, and because they hold this very significant social and cultural position as experts of health. So in response to this, there has to be some kind of mechanism by which patients are protected from the mistakes of doctors, and this comes in part as something called the duty of candor. That is the duty of a doctor to own up to a patient should they make a mistake. For example, if I prescribe somebody the wrong medicine and then they receive a dose of this wrong medicine, under most circumstances I absolutely have a duty to tell them and say, patient, I'm very sorry, I made a mistake that resulted in you receiving this wrong medication. I'm very sorry, this is what I'm going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. And there are lots of really fine, intricate details around these situations and whether harm has occurred or exactly what form apologies need to take and all of this kind of thing, but that's not important for the video today. All I'm trying to get at with this groundwork is that because doctors have to be able to own up to their mistakes and have a duty to own up to their mistakes, when we're thinking about selecting doctors for medical school, a medical school has to be fairly certain that you are capable of owning up to your mistakes and learning from them. That is why this is so important. So now let's explore that question. Tell me about a time when you made a mistake. Trying to apply some common sense and thinking logically about this, it really needs to be a situation or a mistake where it is a genuine mistake and something went wrong, but not something so catastrophically bizarre or weird or morally wrong that it clearly marks you as being unsuitable for a career in medicine. Because as I'm sure you can fairly well intuitively see, there is a massive difference between saying, I once forgot to hand in my university essay on time and received a bad mark, and let me tell you about the time I killed someone. And because we're going to try and approach this in a way that shows a degree of competency, it's not just the I made a mistake, it's I made a mistake and this is how I reflected on it and what I learned. We are actually demonstrating a competency, This is where our STARR structure comes in, STARR. This is the approach that we're going to be using to work through this kind of problem. Now, I'm not going to suggest a list of mistakes in this video that I would deem acceptable, because I don't have any more knowledge than anybody else on this particular topic. But we need to be sensible. It needs to be something that you can present and say, this is something I did wrong, this is how I got better, and this is how I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again. But not an ongoing character flaw or something that marks you as clearly inappropriate for the career for which you are applying. That would be stupid. And as ever, with this kind of problem, do not try and twist inappropriate characteristics or positives about yourself into something to fit this kind of situation. This I care too much, or I work too hard. As someone who has sat through hundreds of mock interviews at this point, please don't do this. It's extremely annoying. So, STAR. The S in our STAR structure starts with situation. We're going to be outlining all of the W's, which is ironic in a situation that's really about L's. But it's the when was this, where were you, who was there, what were you doing? You're just providing the background to the situation in only as much detail as is required to adequately set the scene. Do not waffle on, because this bit isn't where the value is, but the person does need to be able to understand what we're talking about. Now, the T in the STAR structure normally stands for task, and this is actually where we're going to modify it a little bit and talk about the mistake. We were trying to achieve a task, but something went wrong. And I think it's really important that we do own the mistake here. Exactly the same principles apply as when we're talking about examples of leadership. We need to use person-centered language, not we did X, my team did Y. This is all about you. The question is, when did you make a mistake? I forgot to hand in my essay on time. I forgot to write down an important piece of information. I did not charge someone for the item they bought in the shop where I was working. This isn't the time to be defensive about anything. You need to be honest and say, this is a time when I made a mistake. A in our STAR structure is then for action, what you actually did, and the action here is in recognizing, owning, and acting upon the mistake. Before launching into things, I would advise reflecting on how you actually recognize that a mistake had been made at all, because that is a crucial thing to be able to do and forms part of the problem solving. You have to be able to recognize actually that something is wrong in order to be able to then act upon it, and that acting upon it is then the next really important step. Everyone makes mistakes, that's okay, we all know this, and that's a part of life, but the difference here is that some people will make mistakes and then either not spot that they've made a mistake, or they will spot that they've made a mistake and then just let it slide, not do anything about it. What you really want in someone who's going to be a healthcare professional, especially a doctor, is someone who is capable of doing both of those things, spotting the mistake and then doing something to rectify it safely. And that's really important for obvious reasons. Doctors can coast, in theory, for a very long time, making mistakes without being caught because of that position of power and prestige that they hold. A medical school assessor needs to know that you will own up. So thinking back to this example of working in a shop, it might be something like, I was counting up the money in the till at the end of the day, and I noticed that there was less money in the till than there should be, based on the items that I'd sold. I then worked back through everything that had been sold that day. I immediately told my boss, that is escalating and asking for help, but I didn't try to hide the mistake, and I called the customer in question to let them know that I'd forgotten to charge them. They then came back to the shop the next day and paid for the item, but I recognised that I got lucky. We may not have had their telephone number. They may have simply not opted to come back to the shop. They could have been dishonest and not paid for the item. That's just trying to demonstrate a little bit of initiative in some problem solving or an action that you could have taken. R in the STAR structure is then for result or response, depending on the situation. What did you do as a result of this situation to make sure that that problem doesn't happen again? As we've said, mistakes happen. But you need to be able to learn from your mistakes and take corrective action to ensure it doesn't happen again, and you get better at what you do, just like you will need to as a medical student and as a doctor. In In this example where we forgot to charge somebody for an item in our shop, in this example of working in our shop, it might be something practical like I put my hand on the till as soon as I go behind the counter and I don't take it off until the person has paid for the item, or something like I put items into 2 piles, one for which I've charged and one for which I haven't. I use this as a form of memory device to make sure I was remembering to charge for everything, and eventually this became a habit and I don't need to do that anymore. Eventually this became a habit and I haven't missed another item since, which proves that learning has occurred. And then our final R in the STARR structure is for reflection. Why is all of this ultimately important? And you can try and think about this at multiple levels, from the personal to the interpersonal to the organisational systemic level. For example, I might have let my boss down. I have a lot of respect for my boss and I don't want them to think badly of me. I take pride in what I do and I want to be good at the thing that I do and thought of as good at what I do by other people. So that's your personal level stuff. But my boss has other employees to pay. They have a family of their own. They have the business to keep running. So my mistake in not charging someone actually affects not just me, not just my boss, but potentially lots of other people. The customer in question isn't likely to come to any kind of harm here, but we would need to consider any effects on third parties, drawing obvious parallels to somebody like a patient. And just to round off, something like my boss was very understanding. We talked about it, we debriefed, we discussed how I was going to get better, and then we moved on from it and chalked it up as a learning experience. So now not only do I know that it's okay to make mistakes and that I'm capable of improving myself to solve them, but if I was ever working with colleagues, perhaps leading the healthcare team as I will with a doctor, I know how important it is to have other people feel that they are able to mistakes, to own up to them and to talk to me about it, and that will make me a more supportive colleague and help the whole team work better as a result. So that's where we'll wrap it, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Please be sure to hit that like button for me, leave a comment, subscribe. Don't forget to go and check out my website ollieburton.com, where you can find written transcripts of all of these videos. Take care and I'll see you next time.